Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. They're always exciting. I'm talking to a man in a lovely shirt who has written some books, produced some films, and that is author, creator, master of wit, Stephen Paul Leiva. Do I call you Stephen or Stephen Paul?
Stephen will suffice as long as you do
Perfect.
add the end at the end.
Okay, okay. All right. I will do that. Uh, how are you, Stephen?
I'm okay for a man in my condition.
And what condition is that?
The human condition, Jason, the human condition.
There it is. There it is.
There you go.
Yes. Some existentialism to start out our conversation. You were talking about some John Paul and a couple of other folks. So I'm
Yeah,
assuming Ringo was there as well.
uh, Ringo Starr.
I'm
Uh,
kidding. I'm kidding.
no, Ringo the gunfighter from the Old West was there, I think. Was
Perfect.
it called
Perfect.
Ringo? Sound,
One would be answering some existential questions as a gunfighter in the Old West, I think.
yeah, maybe there was a little time travel going on after the war. You never know.
Could have been. Could have been. It sounds like the plot of another book. And speaking of that, you've written Traveling in Space, Creature Feature, Imp, and th I believe your name is also in a couple of films. Is this true?
Uh, my name is on three different films.
I'm thinking of this little independent film, Space Jam.
Yeah, it was sure independent. Space Jam, I was one of the animation producers, and in fact, not to be too modest, but if I hadn't come along, the film wouldn't have been made because they had Michael Jordan for a locked-in period of time because he had to go back and get sweaty playing basketball
hmm
or whatever he played at that time, and Ivan Reitman, who was the producer, and you know who Ivan Reitman was, Ghostbusters, and all the great comedies.
hmm
They couldn't find, there wasn't an animation studio in town that wanted to touch it. They were busy because this was at, well, the Renaissance happened around 89 when Little Mermaid hit, and then everybody had to have an animation studio. And
hmm
Warner Brothers had a new animation studio, but they were off making this Camelot movie, which was
hmm
god awful. Um, And so they were asking some independent people. And my partner at the time and I had previously been producing an animated feature based on the Betty Boop character for MGM and for Richard Zanuck and for Richard Fleischer, the grandson of, or actually the nephew of Max Fleischer and the son of Dave Fleischer. And Richard Fleischer had been a longtime live action film director for many, many years.
hmm
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Narrow Margin. He had a really, really good career. And he was a very nice man. And they, at first, was going to make a Betty Boop live action film, couldn't figure out how to make Betty Boop's head that big and freaky. So animation got hot. They turned back to animation. And we were approached. Our agents got us a meeting with Zanuck, and took a year to make the deal with MGM. It's a whole long story. We finally got into it. My partner was writing the screenplay. Of course, we all collaborative on it. And I set up a studio, and we started. And then Alan Ladd Jr., who was the head of MGM, lost the job. A new guy came in, and he canceled the film. We were like 75% boarded. We had a staff. We had animation studios in Europe that were going to join us, and then it all got canceled, which was hugely disappointing. So when Ivan Reitman called us in and said, "Is there any way we can get this film made?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. We have a process." It was actually a process put forward by the guy who was going to direct Betty Boop for us, uh, an animator named Steve Moore. And so we had a preconceived notion of what to do. And we had already set up studios for Betty Boop. So getting back in the swing of it, in 3 days, I contacted some studios in England and Ohio. There's a studio in Ohio we used, and we got running about 3 days. We basically had a studio, and so that was very interesting. And Steve Moore's innovative idea was American animation studios often go overseas for animation. What he said is there's these small studios throughout in America, Canada, Europe. and they're all headed up usually by a master animator. Instead of just jobbing off work to them, make them a unit,
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
old Disney system where you had units, character units, and they were make each one a unit with the head of the studio as the animation director for that unit. And it was a brilliant idea. And so we were able to set up Space Jam in days, basically. And of course, it rolled on. Had to keep adding more people. But we got started, and I
Wow.
brought people over from two studios in London and the studio in Ohio. And we were set up at first on the Universal Studio lot and started doing uh, inspirational art and looking at the script, which quite frankly wasn't that good. But nothing written in the script for the animation survived. We basically took over all the animation
Nice.
bits and storyboarding it and gag people and just doing our thing. It followed the plot line. It gave Ivan and what they wanted, but we were able to go beyond what the writers had done.
It's
So,
nice.
but it was a huge problem with a lot of things on that project, but it got made. It got made in time, and uh, my partner and I had negotiated, you know, main title credits,
Uh-huh.
and Warner Brothers brought on their own producer and gave him main title credits with us. But he's
There
no
you go.
longer with us. I'm sorry to say. So my bitterness is probably not there anymore. But after that, that was before that I produced a short bit of animation when I was president of Chuck Jones Productions and
Hmm.
a film you've probably never seen called Stay Tuned.
I've totally seen Stay Tuned.
Oh, you have? Well, produced the animation in that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I left Chuck Jones Productions, partnered with a new person. That led to Betty Boop. That led to Space Jam. But after all that, I was more or less got out of it, except for doing voiceover on an independent animated short
hmm,
by Steve Moore, who had been with us on Betty Boop, who the previous year had been nominated for an Academy Award for a Disney short he did. And this short, called The Indescribable Nth, made the top 10 list for the short animated film. Not, unfortunately, not the top five. So I'm not voiced in a Academy Award nominated film, unfortunately, but could have been almost.
Top 10 is not bad. Top 10 is not bad.
Yeah, but it was Steve Moore is a interesting, quirky artist, and Indescribable Inth, which is on Vimeo, I believe you can see it,
Yeah.
is an interesting little film.
So your career has taken you into the realms of folks like Chuck Jones, I believe Ray Bradbury, whose name I see right behind you over there.
Right, Ray Bradbury a lot
Yes.
because one of the first films I was working on, which unfortunately our version did not get made, um, is I many years ago, I was introduced to Brad Bird and Jerry Reese, and they had a project based on Will Eisner's The Spirit.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I had gotten, I shouldn't have even been in film because all I really wanted to do was write novels. But through circumstances, it happened. Trying to earn a living, it happened. I became a publicist for animation studios, Bill Melendez, who did the Peanuts, Chuck Jones, Richard Williams, all over the place. June Foray, the voice of Rocky the Flying Squirrel.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I said, I was falling in love with the art form. And I said, well, I got to do something more than this. So I wanted to become a producer. I wound up working for Gary Kurtz, who had produced Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, who now had his own company. And uh, Bird and Reese wanted to do The Spirit. They did a reel, pencil test reel, using animators they all grew up with at Cal Arts, and it looked like a trailer for the film. It
Hmm.
was brilliant, and it was the best human animation I'd ever seen. So I took that, got it to Gary Kurtz. He said, "Let's go forward." I negotiated the rights with Will Eisner, but then Kurtz hired me to be director of animation development, and he had a project with the Japanese, which was based on Little Nemo in Slumberland, and old Will, not Will Eisner, back to who am I? Winsor McCay, early
Hmm.
20th century comic strip. And that was interesting. It meant I lived in Tokyo for a year, but we weren't seeing eye to eye on the film. And finally, I told Gary, I got to have a career back in Hollywood, so I'm leaving. Eventually, he left. But the people I found for him to be on the American staff, because it was supposed to be a complete co-production, equal, were people like Roger Allers, who
Mhm.
later went on and co-wrote and co-directed The Lion King and co-wrote the Broadway version, which has made him a fortune.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can be a yeah on okay. Randy Cartwright, who worked at Disney on many many things afterwards. Both gentlemen, unfortunately, uh, had to leave their homes because of the fires here in LA.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
trying to track how they're doing. And Robin Budd, who became a big TV animation director up in Canada, he's from Canada. And Norton Vergine, who wound up doing a lot of Rugrats later on in his career, now's in Ireland, I believe, and he directs animation there. So they were all good talent. You know, I had an eye for talent, and I'm proud of that fact.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I left. I'm gone. It's not
And
really.
that
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that brings us to the world of the novels, and I'm curious
Yes.
what it's like to sort of create in these spaces. Film is this hugely collaborative. It sounds like you were problem solving constantly, and then to go to the world of prose, what's that been like?
Oh, it's the collaborative part that I found out was really the problem
Hmm. Hmm.
because deep in my soul, I just don't really want to collaborate with anybody. I'm fairly monkish. And I realized, because I got involved in animation, I fell in love with it, but I couldn't do it. You know, as I always said, I can't draw anything except blood on occasion. So I was, all I could be as was a producer and possibly a writer. And my partner and I did write some screenplays and had deals at Columbia and MGM, none of which really happened, but then that's Hollywood. Um, uh, so I just, it wasn't fulfilling in that creative sense. I was a good organizer. I think I was pretty good as a producer, but it wasn't giving me what I wanted. And even on Betty Boop, when we started that, I was writing Traveling in Space early in the morning before I went to the studio because I had to do something for myself. So
Hmm.
the segue after Space Jam, uh, it was lost it for me. There wasn't much opportunity coming up. In any case, my partner and I had a couple projects we were trying to get off the ground in live action with like one animated character and that kind of comedy stuff. But it just wasn't going forth, so I just kept at home writing the novels. I mean, I wrote my first fixer adventure called Blood is Pretty in between when Betty Boop died, and I was just, that's when I said, you know, let
Hmm.
me write something. And I got inspired to write this particular one, which is also a satire on Hollywood. And then the day after I finished it is when we got the call from Ivan Reitman. So then we worked on Space Jam, and we could only be on it for 18 months by contract that we made because we had this deal at Columbia for a couple films. And we
Hmm.
were hoping one that my partner and I had written, who was Jerry Reese, uh, would fly, and we segued to that. Unfortunately, it didn't, but after 18 months, we left Space Jam. And then it was finished off by the crew we'd put together.
Hmm. Hmm.
And though I wrote the second Fixer novel, Hollywood is an all-volunteer army, and both are really satires on Hollywood and inspired by James Bond and Bulldog Drummond and those adventure books that I read that I love so much. I created my own character called The Fixer with two X's.
Hmm.
Okay, because all the other Fixer things out there, they don't have two X's. You got to
That's
have
right.
two X's.
It's the
Uh,
double X.
yeah, he's only known as the Fixer. You never know what his past was or anything like that. So
Yeah.
it was an easy segue because I was far more comfortable doing that than having to deal with people.
Yeah, yeah. What attracts you especially about, on the one hand, satire, but also science fiction?
Well, as a kid, I was fascinated by, and I was born in 49, so I grew up in the 50s, just as the whole space situation was happening. And I wanted to go to space. I loved anything that had to do with rockets and going to space and what have you. I wasn't, I didn't, they had a lot of kids' space programs early in television in the 50s. I was a bit too young, caught up with them later, like Tom Corbett and Space Patrol and things like that. And then,
Hmm.
of course, as I was entering my senior year, I think in high school, Star Trek came on, and I had loved Forbidden Planet. I was influenced more by cinema, science fiction, probably the novels. I read science fiction when I was a kid, but I read a whole lot of things, and I didn't read a lot of science fiction. But most impressed by, say, Time Machine, H.G. Wells. I like Jules Verne, and then of course Ray Bradbury became an influence, although he's not really a science fiction writer. He once told me that the only true science fiction book he ever wrote was Fahrenheit 451.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
he was a fabulous, or a fantasist. But all that science fiction, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, horror, it's really the literature or the storytelling of the fantastic and
Yeah,
the unrealistic. I mean, science fiction today, there's not much science in science fiction anymore.
true, true.
Galactic empires. What were they influenced by? Oh, I think the cinema. All these books on and rebels fighting galactic empires. And if you think about it, a lot of the science fiction is pure fantasy.
Yeah.
If you really know a little bit about science and a little bit about going into space, you know that we ain't going to get very far very soon unless they happen to create faster than light, which is a controversy whether physically could even happen. Um, so it's really old-fashioned storytelling,
Hmm.
Robin Hood and knights in shining armor, and even obviously the Western put in that setting. So much of science fiction is production design.
Yeah.
It's costuming. It's the look, which I was always attracted to.
Yeah.
So I would watch anything that was science fiction, influenced by Twilight Zone, which is more fantastic sort of stuff. But when Star Trek came along, and I've been a huge Trek fan ever since. And I'm wearing my Superman T-shirt.
Hmm.
Superman comics were very big in my childhood. My main literature, I did not read classic children's literature. Uh, haven't read much of it to this day, quite frankly. But comic books I still read.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about the science aspect, so much of science fiction is almost social science fiction in a way, talking about empires and societies and rebels and
Yeah,
things of that nature.
which is what we understand,
Hmm.
especially if you don't understand science. So what I've written that might be called science fiction, and I don't really consider myself a science fiction author, is really, again, I go back to being a comic and satiric writer. And so it's that I use science fiction as a landscape, or some may say I abuse it, but uh, it gives you that stage setting.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in Traveling in Space, which the conceit is, it's a first contact novel, which I'm sure all your audience knows what that is, but told from the point of view of the aliens.
Hmm.
Therefore, I can look at Earth society and people, and I call it a 21st century Gulliver's Travels, which is one of the great works of satire of all time.
Hmm.
My Journey to Where is inspired by the scientific romance genre of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and even Edgar Rice Burroughs. So the science in that, so somebody, a review on Amazon was really quite upset with me because the science is so bad in it. Well, it was never intended to be anything but because if H.G. Wells and Jules Verne more than H.G. Wells, I think, tried to be as scientific as possible in their era. But now I just make up the science to for the plot because the book is really about authoritarianism,
Ah.
and the book is about the oppressing people for one reason or another. So you have a bunch of scientists that are trying to do a cyclotron experiment to find the element of time. The scientist believes time is an actual element,
Hmm.
and something happens, and they wake up, and they start off in the Arizona desert, but when they wake up, there's a big cyclotronic whatever thing in the circle is the outside is covered with jungle, and the inside is still the within the circum is still the Arizona desert, and they get up on top of this thing, and a bunch of dinosaurs come by. So, have they gone back in time? Is it an alternate universe? I kind of play with that for a long time, but it's obviously a world where the comet did not hit the Earth, and the dinosaurs continued ascendant, and eventually there were bipedal intelligent dinosaurs, and they rule this particular space. And then our humans, which are mammals, and there's only like little mammals left, have to contend with that and try to figure out how do we get back. And the thing is it another universe? Because they obviously didn't go back in time, or what they're really concerned about is did we destroy our universe
Hmm.
and create this one at the same time? And how do we get back home? So, it's the literature of the fantastic because we're attracted to fantastic ideas. And
Hmm.
I certainly was as a kid, so that maintains. But then I have a play I wrote called Made on the Moon, which was really about me wanting to go into space. But
Hmm.
my character is limited. All he wants to do is go to the moon. He doesn't really know why. It's called Made on the Moon. We premiered it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival back in '96. Kept missing productions here in the United States. I finally gave up with the theater and I turned it into a novella, and it's part of my book called Extraordinary Voyages, which of course harkens back to Jules Verne. Uh,
Hmm.
and I'm happy with it because, and that's when I really said, yeah, I'm prose. That's my art. That's
Yeah.
what I love more than anything else. I loved writing the stage play, um, but prose, you are everything. You are the writer, you are the director, you are the production designer, you're the set decorator, you're the costume designer. You do the friggin' makeup if you want, depending
Hmm.
on your abilities for description.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was an easy segue uh, to just be monkish and sit on my recliner chair where I write almost all my novels sitting in a recliner chair. Thank God they created laptops because I would have a hard time if it was a
That
full
could be
computer on my
complicated.
lap.
Well,
Anyway,
where
does
would
that make
you,
sense at all?
yeah, absolutely. Where would you like to go next in your creative journey?
Well, that's a good point. I'm getting on in years there, as they say, and I thought I had finished with my last novel. Actually, I'm one of well, I I was published by several other publishers, and then was convinced by a good friend, another writer named Jean Raby, who unfortunately right now is very ill, and we're tracking what's happening to her. She was a journalist, wrote science fiction and fantasy. She helped several science fiction authors at the end of their days finish their novels. So she, who's the great female science fiction writer? Anyway,
Look when
no, another one.
Bradley, Marion Zimmer Bradley,
No, another one.
the
Yeah,
Battle of Hastings. Sorry.
yeah, Battle Based. I don't have a good handle, but she would do that and then write a lot of her own fantasy books. And then she was editor of the Science Fiction Writers magazine for a while, and commissioned me to write a memorial on Ray Bradbury because Ray had been a friend and a colleague for many many years. Um, but now she's writing a series of mystery novels, the Piper Blackwell mystery novels, which are quite fine. And despite the fact that she had been published often by mainstream publishing, they wouldn't let her write mystery novels. No, no, you're a fantasy author. And she just,
Uh,
yes. So, modern technology being what it is, she created her own publishing company and she publishes her own book. And she said, you should do that, Stephen.
mhm.
And I said, but whatever Jean says, I do. Simple as that. So I created Magpie Press and I took my books back from the other publishers and all my new books, and they're all on Magpie Press on Amazon.
Nice.
And I even took a novel, my first novel I ever wrote in my 20s, which had been sitting on the shelf for years and years and years. And I went back and then she said, you should publish that. And I said, I wrote in my 20s. It's probably crap. She said, go check it out. So I read it and I said, hey, this isn't crap. I made a few changes, proof and polish and all that. And I published that. It's called Right Portrait of a Controversy. And once I got all those up, and I was saying to Gene, yeah, I think that's it. I'm just going to concentrate on trying to sell the darn books. She said, no, write another book. I said, Gene, I really write another book. So I'm always doing what Gene tells me to do. And son of a gun, I got an idea and wrote a book. It comes out in February. Here's the
Very
cover,
nice.
cover for it. The Person Who Hated People. Which,
Speaking of monkish
yeah,
misanthropy
and
and
yeah,
satire.
all novels are autobiographical, but this is not specifically autobiographical. Um, and it was a joy and delight, and of course I've dedicated it to her, and I just said, for Jean Raby, your wish, my command. Simple as that. So now whether there's another one in me or not, I don't know. Hit the showers. Ideas come to you when you're taking a nice hot shower or
Sure.
doing the dishes. It's something about hot water, you know. Uh, it
Gets
spurs.
things flowing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the blood flowing and it goes up to your brain, I guess, and go, oh, I can do that.
Mhm,
I'd like
mhm.
to do something now because this last one was I wrote it in 6 months, but it was very enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure the idea will come.
Yeah, and I don't know what else to do with myself anyway. So
And the recliner is right there.
I've got I've got one here in the living room and one in the bedroom. I work in the bedroom. My wife works for the local PBS station, and she's able to work at home since COVID
Hmm.
and continue to work at home. So she's back at the dining room table with her computer all set up during the day and taking care of business there. So we're
Nice.
separated by a hallway, but the twain does meet, usually as
Yeah.
we both try to go to the bathroom at the same time. 41 years of marriage, that seems to happen.
Yes, yes. You're on the same schedule. Yeah.
Right.
Where might I go? You mentioned Amazon. Are there other spaces that you would recommend people check the
Oh,
books out?
Amazon. Amazon. Yeah, I don't know. Jeff Bezos may be an asshole. I don't know, but I like Amazon for me. It's
Yeah.
been very, very good to me. It's allowed us. See, the problem with publishing, and I don't call it self-publishing, by the way. This is very important. I consider myself a independent digital author or an indie digital author.
Mhm.
And it's indie digital publishing because indie rock, it's a big deal. Indie films, hey, that's cool. That's better than Hollywood crap, right? Indie films. Why
Mhm.
not indie publishing? Because the publishing is what, five main conglomerates in America.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard, especially, I just read an article where the publishers don't want male writers anymore.
Hmm.
The bulk of your readers of mainstream literature, especially fiction, out there are female, and so they're going for the female writers. So that's dispiriting, but I kind of knew it in my gut. There may be, I'm not saying there is, but there may be an MFA mafia out there where all the new writers went through their Masters of Fine Arts at the university and writing programs. And
Mhm.
I'm and maybe I'm fictionalizing here, but the head of the writing program, he knows all the agents, and he says, "Oh, this one's," I don't know. So I think it's hard for anybody else. So self-publishing in the old days, though, was like Vantage Press. You pay them a lot of money, they produce a book, they say they're going to market it, and they don't, and it's cheaply produced and what have you. That was
Mhm.
never any interest. But the new technology, print on demand, ebooks, everything was there. You could write your own book. You can hire an editor if you want. You should if you're not good at editing your own book. Certainly, uh, I've learned to format my own books, but the covers, I come up with the concept for every cover I've ever had,
Mhm.
inspired by Ian Fleming, who always did that for the James Bond. But then I have a great cover designer recommended to me by who? Gene Raby.
Right,
And
right.
Juan, he's in Venezuela. I give him a concept and he turns it into great covers like this. And he
Mhm.
he can do it within 30 minutes sometimes. The
Wow.
guy is incredible. So I hand him a cover idea that's prose, and he comes back with poetry. So I'm delighted with that because a good cover is very important. Um, I guess for sales, but it's important to me because I want it to delight me. It's
Mhm.
just like, who do you write for? I write for myself. I don't write for anybody else. Um, and I learned that from Chuck Jones in the many years I was his publicist for many years, and then for 2 years I headed up a new company we formed called Chuck Jones Productions. And Chuck and I spent a lot of time going on accompanying him when he'd lecture, and he was constantly asked, "Who are you guys making the Looney Tunes for?" And he said, "For ourselves," because no one else gave a damn. The heads of Warner Brothers, they just needed an animated short because that's what the theaters wanted. So they
Right.
didn't give a damn about these characters. So we made them for us to please ourselves.
Mm.
And what did they make? A lot of very, very funny, creative short films.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you can't go wrong if you stay true to yourself and delight yourself. So if I've written anything that's science fiction like, it's because I liked science fiction as a kid, but I write mainstream novels. I write novels about love. I have a series of three novels, the Love, Sex, and Pursuit of Happiness novels.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Bully for Love, the theme is love. By the Sea, the theme is happiness. And Reluctant Heterosexual, I think you can guess that the theme is human sexuality.
Mhm.
So there's a lot, whatever I'm interested in, if I come up with an idea and a plot line, I'll write it. It doesn't have to be what we now call genre, but the Fixer novels are thrillers, but they're Hollywood satires.
Yeah.
Um, my science fiction are fantastic, but they're also satiric because I can't help myself. It's,
Yeah.
you know, I was vaccinated by something satiric when I was a kid, probably. Nothing I can do about it.
I like it. I like it. It's a way of processing reality. It's the best possible way.
Well, that's it. It's and I've always said a writer is not a person who wants to write. A
Mhm.
writer is a person who can't help but writing.
I like
It
that.
you just have to. I had a Facebook friend the other day, and I was uh, every once in a while I post on Facebook all the covers of my books because if you don't if you don't promote yourself unless you pay people a lot of money, ain't nobody else going to do it for you.
Mhm.
And she pointed in there. She said, "Yeah, I've got two novels in me. If I could just find the time, or if life wasn't getting in the way." And I so wanted to write back to her and chastise her, but I don't because I never do. But people will think that way. Yeah, I could write a great novel. I've got it in me. Well, then do it. Just shut up. You know, do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
There's yeah, oddly enough that Nemo film, which we called Nemo, but is based on Little Nemo in Slumberland. The theme, and that's Ray Bradbury was on it as a screenwriter for a year on that project.
Mhm.
Although I'd met him previously because he was good friends with Chuck Jones. Um, the theme of that was the difference between a dreamer and a doer. So, because it was about dreams, and that's kind of the theme that Ray came up with,
Yeah.
and it hit home to me. And because I had put on my office wall a one word little motto, which was "do."
Mhm.
It's meant just don't talk about it, get it done.
I like
And
it.
and a lot of people, though, they can dream and they make themselves feel good. Yeah, I'd be a great writer. Yeah. Well, who's ever going to know
Right,
if,
right.
if you don't write? And the fear is, of course, if they actually write, they find out they're not. So you've got to have, I think you need to be compelled.
Mhm.
Not, nonfiction is different. That may be you're compelled by the subject matter or you're a historian or what have you. But in fiction, I think you really need to be compelled to be a storyteller, you know,
Agreed.
which
Agreed.
is doesn't always pay well, but it's satisfying.
Well, Stephen, I've greatly enjoyed the conversation. I'm thinking about a friend of mine who has a saying up on the wall that says, I can do hard things. So, definitely, go
Yeah.
get it done kind of end of the episode, which I like.
Oh, right. Good. Well,
Yeah.
then go do. But you got a podcast, which is good.
We try. Are there any questions you wish I would ask you to close out or any questions for me?
No, I don't know. Let me look at your questions for me. Was there anything you
I thought I might get the Battle of
want?
Hastings there.
No, oh, what led you didn't ask what led you to writing, but I think we sort of
Yeah. Yeah, we kind
was
of
it
talked into that.
yeah, it was really I guess being a kid and reading, but
Hmm.
um and in high school I started writing poetry, which all high school potential writers write. And it was very didactic and very philosophical because, I was uh, uh, too important for my own good. But I liked the poems. But I wrote one poem about my dad forcing me to mow the lawn. And I showed my poems to two English teachers at Azusa High School where I went. One was Mrs. Johnson, who I always remember and revere, and the other one I don't remember because I didn't like her. The one I didn't like said, well, your poem about mowing the lawn, that's good, but all these others, you're too young to be writing this shit, this stuff. And she wrote on the thing. And then I handed it to Mrs. Johnson and she read it and she said, I 100% disagree. I like your philosophical poems better than the cutting the grass poem. And that taught me a big lesson. No matter what you write, you're not gonna please everyone
True enough.
because no work of art lives in a vacuum.
Hmm.
Just take a
Hmm.
painting on the wall. That painting is the painting the artist wanted to paint. There's three people looking at it in the museum. That painting is also three different paintings as the three different people look at it
Hmm.
because you can't help but bring yourself into something. So, and I find when I get mainly good reviews, luckily from both Amazon reviewers, but people and magazines, and I've been able to get some nice reviews from the mainstream press and that sort of stuff. But when someone doesn't like your book, you can almost figure out why in their psychology they didn't get it. So anyway, if someone really criticizes the fact that my science is iffy on my satiric science fiction novels, they're usually a pretty diehard science person or engineer.
Hmm.
Engineers, and I've had good friends that are engineers, but they're funny. I find that a lot of them don't even read fiction,
Hmm.
which upsets the hell about me with me. But, I guess that's why you're an engineer. Traveling in Space was originally published by a spaceflight engineer who works for JPL,
Ah.
Propulsion Laboratory, who became a friend, and he wanted to publish Traveling in Space. And I suggested he create a publishing company because he had his own book about nonfiction about spaceflight. But he reads almost exclusively from cover to cover every week The New Yorker,
Uh-huh.
and he reads a lot of nonfiction books, but he rarely will read fiction. So I'm not even sure he read all of Traveling in Space. No, actually he did because being an engineer, he counts himself as a great editor, and he edited uh, Traveling in Space. When I took it back, and by this point he decided not to continue with Blue Roof Publishing anyway, so he was happy for me to take it back. I reproofed it, and put it through Grammarly, which I don't know if you know about Grammarly.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
is, I found Grammarly to be a superb uh, process to go through your books and edit because you can say, yeah, you're right, I'll change it or not. And there's
Hmm.
no one to argue with. So, again, monkeys want to be alone. Um, and I found a whole slew of more editing things that could be done. And when I told Dave, he was quite shocked. But he's a wonderful guy. Another guy had to evacuate. He lives in Altadena,
Mm,
where the,
yeah.
the Eaton fire is. We believe his house is still safe, and I hope it is. Beautiful little house in Altadena he's had for years, and he's a delightful, wonderful person. It's just he shocks me every time he tells me he doesn't read fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I enjoy nonfiction, but every now and then the fanciful, the imaginative, I do enjoy that avenue for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The mind's eye likes to go a wandering.
Yes, yes.
I like
Uh,
that. I got to write that down.
you really should. You really should. I'm going to compliment the t-shirt. I'm going to compliment the Bradbury background there.
Oh,
Love
you
it.
should. That's actually Bradbury the dog, uh,
Ah, nice.
who used to belong to Bradbury the man,
Oh, wow.
because after his death in 2012, I had a Bradbury read. Now, in 2010, I had created a whole week of uh, attractions throughout Los Angeles for his 90th birthday. And
Hmm.
I got the city council to declare it Ray Bradbury Week because I told them, I said, look, Ray Bradbury deserves a month. I know you usually give people a day, but I'll take a week. And they gave him a week. Then I had to organize all these things. So it's screenings and all kinds of stuff. And Ray came to almost every one. But in 2012, I did, oh, no, we dedicated um, Ray Bradbury Square, downtown LA at Fifth and Flower, right by the Central Library and
Nice.
Dwyer Park. And Ray spent a lot of time at the Central Library when he was young. It's our,
Writing, I assume, on the
yeah.
typewriter, right? Yeah.
Um, well, the typewriter was more at UCLA, but
Oh,
he
okay,
was
okay.
he was going to the Central Library. He called it his university
Mm,
because is the Depression. He couldn't afford to go to college. His parents couldn't pay for it, so he just read book after book after book after book in the Central Library, sitting in the Central Library, getting an education, not a formal education, but a form of education. So we made that Ray Bradbury Square. Again, I got the city and the mayor to agree to that, and we have a big plaque up. Ray Bradbury Square, author Angelino, because he loved Los Angeles.
hmm.
Um, and I don't know why I'm telling you that.
Yeah, the
Except
bear, the bear.
after the dedication, it's a dog actually, a sheepdog.
Oh, dog, sorry.
The
Yes.
dedication, we had dedication down there, and I had Joe Mantegna, the actor, speaking, and city officials, and had three of the four sisters, daughters of Ray there. And afterwards, we all went back to his house, which was being packed up because they were going to sell it, but it was still there. And the daughters were there, and Ray had slews of stuffed animals,
Mm,
and they put them all in the living room and invited us who had been at the dedication, who came afterwards, take what you want,
yeah.
grab what you want. Each one of you get one. And I grabbed the bear. The bear. See, you've got me doing it. I the
Sorry.
sheepdog. I believe I'm the one who grabbed the sheepdog. If not, my daughter and Miranda did. I have another daughter. And then there's a bat that he had. So the bear, the
The dog.
Jake, the dog is Bradbury the dog, and the bat is Ray the bat.
Nice. Love it.
So he's
Love
been
it.
there in that chair, and we decorate him all at Christmas, and we decorate him at Halloween, which was Ray's. And then normally he's sitting there now with three big books of Ray Bradbury's early writing and EC comics based on Bradbury stuff. These big books I've been buying. So he guards those, and he sits there.
That's the guard dog. I love it. I
It's the
love it.
guard dog. So we
Much friendlier than the Hound in Fahrenheit 451, I must say.
yes, which it's too bad that they didn't put that in Truffaut's movie,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
that Hound is really something.
it really is.
So
Really
a
is.
Facebook site called Ray Bradbury Week,
Hmm.
which people may want to go onto if they like Ray. And on there, I have everything about Ray Bradbury Week, including video. I also directed one of his one-act plays, The Better Part of Wisdom. I had James Cromwell starring in that, and Seamus Dever, who was on Castle at the time, playing the Irish lieutenant that was part of the Castle mystery series on ABC. And Seamus later did the audiobook of my novel Creature Feature. He produced
I
it, he
love it.
directed it, he and his wife did it. His wife did the one main role, and then he did everything else. Seamus is wonderful. Uh, but yeah, Ray's will always still be in my life. Knew him for many, many years, since about 1978, I think, and was a great friend. And wasn't his writing was an early influence on me. His
Hmm.
writing, Ian Fleming, the James Bond, and W. Somerset Maugham.
Nice. Nice.
Combine them all.
Yeah. Well, in honor of Mom, of Human Bondage, I won't keep you any longer, but thank you so much for the time. Thank you for the
You're more than
conversation.
welcome. Thank you. I
Uh,
appreciated it.
yeah, glad to have you back to explore more, to talk storytelling and anything else that you'd like to share about.
Anytime you want, dear sir, anytime.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you so much.